We're here with Yonkers Voice, and we are having a political interview with candidate for Senate, Shelley Mayer, who is an Assemblywoman, and Shelley's thrown her hat in the ring. And you can listen to the interview at yonkersvoice.com. So we're going to start right away. Shelley, it looks like there's been a new development in the Senate race. Mayor Spano has thrown his hat in the ring. Not officially, but there's...
Well, apparently he's expressed his interest, and that's great. More people in is fine. There are 3 announced candidates before Mayor Spano got in. So, you know, for those of us who are in this race, and I've been in for a while, we do our best to make sure that voters are informed and educated. This is not something that we know when voters are going to be able to vote, and actually we don't even know the process in detail by which the candidate will be selected.
But with so many candidates in the race at this point, that would be number 4, correct? That would be
Yes,
the 4th
he would
candidate.
be the 4th.
Does that dilute the issues?
Well, let me just explain the process first, because so this is going to be a special election called by the governor. It can't be called until after the seat is vacant. The seat won't be vacant until George Latimer, currently the senator, becomes the county executive on January 1st. After that, it's in the governor's discretion to determine when the race will be called. And he actually doesn't even have to call a special election, could remain vacant till November. But presuming he does call one in the next few months, then each party decides on its single candidate. It's not a primary, so the Democrats pick one candidate, the Republicans pick one, every other party that's entitled to run a candidate picks their candidate, and then on the day of the election, we run. So at this point, the 4 you have mentioned, we're all Democrats. We are competing for the votes of Democrats who are entitled to vote in this process, which is a small subset of people who are either Democratic district leaders or Democratic town, village, or city leaders. So you're talking about, you know, it's about 600 people who are ultimately going to make this decision. It is a small group of, tends to be activist people who are active in the Democratic Party. So I think it's less about diluting the issue than making the opportunity for every candidate to make sure people know their credentials, how they can win the race, what kind of true Democrat they are. It's very important in this particular race for what is going to be a pivotal seat in whether the Democrats take control of the state Senate.
And which brings us to the issues. There are a number of outstanding issues plaguing Westchester County, one of which is on the Hudson River Barge, which isn't a done deal yet.
Right.
And it has big implications.
Right.
Environmental issues, political issues, funding issues. So far the Coast Guard has implemented a study.
Right.
Which means that they haven't, they're still thinking about using Yonkers and other platforms along the river to park their barges.
But what we did in the state legislature last year, and the governor has just signed the bill, and I was proud to be a co-sponsor, is change the state law to give the state more authority to regulate the use of these barges where it impacts state issues and state law. So we didn't have that before. Once this threat of the barges came about, all the river towns got together, and it was actually, this bill was sponsored by my colleague who represents Poughkeepsie and points like that, but I was a co-sponsor. The governor signed it, so we already have one additional weapon in our arsenal to try to limit the ability of the Coast Guard. One thing I would say about the 37th Senate District, and one of the unfortunate things for me, because I love representing the west side of Yonkers, is that this seat, for Yonkers' point of view, only represents the east side of Yonkers. So you don't get the issue of the barges as the top of your list, but you have similar challenges with environmental issues on the sound side. And those sound shore communities, which are part of this Senate district, have grave concerns about the use of the sound, protecting it, water resources. So there's a lot of similar issues, and if I would be fortunate enough to be selected by the Democratic Party and then fortunate enough to win in a special election, I would take the kind of enthusiasm I had about this barge issue and translate it into legislative action where we need to on the Sound Shore side.
Well, you know, expanding beyond the shores of Yonkers, Uh, the 37th district, if I am correct, represents 10 towns and cities throughout Westchester, most of which are fairly affluent towns, middle class to upper middle class. I mean, you've got Bedford, you've got Newcastle, the whole
Right.
9 yards. So when it comes to discretionary spending, when it comes to the slush fund, Yonkers being probably one of the poorest cities in that basket, how do you appropriate those monies?
Well, one, I have a reputation for the years I've represented Yonkers as being sort of a knockdown, drag-out fighter for Yonkers, for the Yonkers Public Schools. Every year getting more money for meeting challenges that Yonkers had because of its challenging financial situation. So I'm never going to let my Yonkers roots and my Yonkers passion fade. The challenge is, though, and I think Senator Latimer did this well, you need to be an advocate for the New Rochelle schools. They have their share of challenges. For the Portchester School District, for parts of the White Plains School District that are struggling. So I think it's to my advantage that I've been in the trenches on school financing issues, and you can bring that to the whole district. Now, clearly, as you point out, Yonkers is in a category unto itself, and you have to be realistic about that. It takes somebody who really knows what it takes to get the best we can, and we don't get enough, but we've gotten more every year. And I don't know if you know, recently I just announced that we got another $1.4 million in after-school funding for Yonkers, but we're going to need more and more. So I'm going to work with Senator Stuart Cousins, who represents the west side of Yonkers, if I'm elected, the assembly members who represent Yonkers, and the whole Westchester delegation for each of these communities. And you got to make good judgments. Not everybody's going to like them all the time.
And a good number of the student population are kids that come from immigrant families, which brings us to the topic of sanctuary cities. Now, Yonkers has not declared itself as a sanctuary city. Neither has White Plains or other towns in the 37th district, but they basically become the default sanctuary cities. So how do you protect these cities from repercussions from the present administration, federal administration?
Yes, and I think it's a threat. I would take issue with the description of them as almost sanctuary cities. Yonkers, I think, did a very smart thing, and I credit the mayor and the police commissioner. They released a letter and a memo to their officers giving guidance about what information they should seek, and more important, giving security to people here that you could go walk your kid to school, you could if you be in a car if you're authorized to drive. So I think it's very important that we try to provide security both from a law enforcement point of view, because our law enforcement community needs to know that people are going to come forward about crimes, and also because these are our neighbors. I mean, the wonderful thing about Yonkers is it is such a beautiful, diverse city, and its diversity is its strength. I agree with that. So I think we need to be creative. Now, George Latimer, I think, is going to work to get maybe a slightly revised immigration bill through the county legislature now that it's a majority Democrat. And I think he's going to change it a little bit, but I think he's going to continue to move towards giving people the ability to report crimes and feel safe, while at the same time protecting us against retaliation and also ensuring our law enforcement community has the tools they need. I think there is a way to do it. I look forward to working with him and anyone else of any party who can work with us to achieve these goals.
Well, there are other, on the flip side of the immigration issue, there are others who would argue that there are so many people coming in that have to be accommodated by law. And how do we accommodate it? Do we put a cap on it?
Well, I think, this is a state position that I'm running for. It's not a matter of federal immigration law. It doesn't come before you. That being said, I think I happen to believe the United States is a land of immigrants, and that's a good thing. We need to secure our borders. I think there's some very strong steps we can take. But this is a job that I'm seeking where you take the situation we're given, which is we have some people who are undocumented. For example, we have dreamers, people who are American in every way other than they came generally as small children because their parents sought a better path. I happen to be a sponsor of the New York State DREAM Act, which would give them the ability to go to community college or to state universities with the TAP grant. I think that is a very important step forward. If you go to the breakfast, which I've had the honor of attending, of the valedictorians and salutatorians of the Yonkers Public Schools, a lot of them are dreamers. Top-notch students. We want the best for them. They're going to be here in America. We want them to go to college and to the university and to do well and succeed. So I believe that the State DREAM Act, which has not passed in the Senate and has passed in the Assembly where I sit, that's the kind of thing, when we get a Democratic Senate, we can pass that. A very responsible, forward-looking piece of legislation that helps our best students get a chance to go to college.
Now, in terms of the Senate, I know that you worked as an attorney
Right.
in the Senate, so you're familiar with the Senate. In 2012, Sheldon Silver, who was then the chairman of the head of the state assembly, worked with Vito Lopez to pay 2 complainants in a sexual harassment case. $135,000 was paid to the complainants. Gloria Allred was in the mix. She was the attorney.
Okay.
But the issue was that payment was never reported to the ethics committee.
Right. That was
No.
totally wrong.
It was totally wrong. Now, there was a quote that, if I may,
Yes.
where you said, in terms of supporting Sheldon Silver, I'm a total supporter of the speaker as a leader,
know
said
the
Shelley
date of
Mayer, a Yonkers Democrat who served as a council in New York State Senate before winning a special election. As someone who lived through some very difficult times in the Senate, I know how difficult leadership can be. I think he has exhibited great leadership.
That's after he apologized.
That's after
for
he
a mistake.
apologized.
And he made a mistake, and he went not only to our conference, but to the public, and acknowledged he made a mistake. Now, the other thing I would point out about Sheldon Silver, who had been someone who was very good to me as a new assembly member. In fact, in my first election, ensured that I got $750,000 for sports for the Yonkers Public Schools 7 days before the budget closed, because I went to him and pleaded. Once he was indicted, I was part of the reform effort and one of the instigators of the movement to have him replaced as speaker. And I took the lead on that, even though I had a personal relationship with him, because I thought, we can't do this. But at that point, with the quote you mentioned, he had apologized, he had made a mistake, and I would say I have lived through difficult times. It takes a certain kind of person to do that. I hope, in fact, we changed the rules so it could never happen again, and to require a more affirmative response to complaints, which is one of the things that was not good enough in the assembly in those days. You made a complaint, and it wasn't clear they had a responsibility to investigate. That was wrong. That has been changed. And I will continue to fight on those issues.
In terms of even dealing with your own colleagues in government, could be a hypothetical situation. But what do you do if one of your colleagues is accused of sexual harassment?
Well, you should have a very strong procedure in place, and we do now in the Assembly. We have a mandatory reporting. If I, as a member, think that you as a staff person were harassed in any way by a member, I have an affirmative obligation to report it to an outside counsel. I cannot sort of decide on my own whether it's important enough. I must report it. So that is the kind of thing. We need to set up procedures so there's less ability to backslide, number one. Two, I believe, even though people sometimes are skeptical about training makes you remember what the rules are. And so we have these mandatory trainings. I've sat through one, I believe it's every 2 years. You know, it's not so news to me, but it's very good for some of my male colleagues to have to sit through 4 hours of remembering what the law is and what the consequences are. So I think that's a good thing. Thirdly, we have a new speaker in the Assembly, Carl Hastie, who has set a different tone and certainly democratized the Assembly. And I believe that that is the best disinfectant. Get it out there. This secret kind of behavior that the speaker engaged in contributed to the climate. And it was wrong, and we should never do it again.
Moving on from that topic. It sounds, I mean, it's such a segue. I hate to segue from sexual harassment to homelessness, but because there's nothing that they kind of, where they're interconnected. But on the homeless problem, the homeless problem is growing in Westchester, and it's spreading not only from Yonkers, but it's spreading throughout Westchester. There doesn't seem to be any remedy at this point. Yonkers, I mean, I hate to keep going back to Yonkers, but Yonkers has borne the lion's share of homeless shelters. And it's created an issue. It's created an issue not only for the people who are homeless, but for quality of life for Yonkers residents. So how does that resolve? How does that get resolved?
Well, I'm hopeful that George Latimer, as the county executive, because many of these are county policies that have contributed to Yonkers, frankly, being sort of a dumping ground to some extent, and to the failure of leadership to say, how can we deal with this problem in a constructive way? We have some people who are homeless that we can't seem to address. We have some people who we probably can help, funnel towards job training, find them an apartment. So I'm hopeful that George can take the lead. I was here in this library for a terrific program prior to the election where County Executive Astorino did not show, and George Latimer answered questions from 150 housing activists from all over the county about how we can address homelessness and other housing issues that are so significant, including the cost of housing, which is unaffordable to so many working people in Westchester. So I'm hopeful with George's leadership working with us in the state delegation. I would say one thing, we want to have partners at the city level, at the county level. We want to meet with the county executive and the county board and say, what are your priorities? How can we pass laws that help Westchester County? Let's do that at the beginning, not with 2 days left to go at the end of session or the end, which is how it was done before. Let's get at the front end. Let's try to reach agreement and consensus where we can, and then use the enthusiasm and fight left in our state delegation. And we have a great Westchester delegation to try to make some of these changes, both in law and in budgeting.
But speaking of budget, how is this going to happen if the tax cuts go through, which it looks like they are going to go through? It's going to impact the cities. It's going to impact the cities and the towns, and the negative trickle down to the city residents. So what's going to happen? How are you going to function in the looming budget structure,
Right.
the new budget structure?
Well, we really have two problems. Before we even got to this terrible tax bill that they're considering, we already had a proposed significant deficit in New York State budget for next year. So that was problem one. Now we have this terrible tax bill, and if it goes through, New York just gets killed in this bill. It's punishment for New York and states like New York, and particularly for high property tax and local taxation. Districts like Westchester, you're absolutely right. So we are going to have to take the limited resources we have and try to be as smart and as sharp as we need to be and cut things that need to be cut, even if it kills us, or limit the growth of certain things. At the same time, there are some services like homelessness, like our schools, like Medicaid, which is at great risk with the federal government. We're going to have to find a way to manage that and see, are there additional places we can get revenue. One thing I'm interested in is some of the state's economic development money, which is now used for very good purpose, but we may just have to take some of that and redirect it to things that absolutely must be taken care of.
One of the important things are the uniformed services.
Absolutely.
Because then there are towns, particularly Yonkers, which are understaffed with police. You have a rising population. You have crime issues, and if they have these budget cutbacks, it means that there will have to be a hiring freeze. So then what are you going to do to combat the issues of crime, of fires, with uniformed services, who backed you a lot?
Oh,
I mean,
yes,
you're very strong
absolutely.
with
I'm
unions.
very strong with them. Here's what I think. One, I fought every year in the Assembly to get more money for cities and towns. It's been held flat. Yonkers got the same amount every year since I've been elected. That's not right. The expenses of the municipal government, aside from the school, have continued to increase, and the demands, as you say, on our police and fire have been great. We cannot get that through the Senate. So if there's a Democratic majority in the Senate, we hope there's an understanding that police and fire and basic services in our cities need support from the state. Yonkers cannot tax its residents anymore. We can't just keep plowing taxes on top. And yet we need additional funds. The state is the place that really should subsidize these essential services to a greater extent. It does, but not enough. So I've fought for that every year in the Assembly. The Assembly has passed an increase in what's called the AIM, Aid to Municipalities money. The Senate hasn't. I'm hopeful with the Democratic Senate, if the money is there, spent wisely, we can fight for that.
Now, before Astorino's fall from grace, he had tried very hard to push for the privatization of the Westchester County Airport.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the arguments that he had for the airport was that it would bring in more revenue.
Right.
Now, the privatization of the Westchester County Airport is not a done deal yet. So, in light of the fact that we're looking at this looming budget crisis, would that push the privatization of the Westchester County Airport through? Because then all of a sudden people say, aha, here's a revenue source, looks like we may have to get it now.
Well, two things. One is I believe that County Executive Elect Latimer has said that if the deal is not a done deal, he's going to go fight for more money. You know, the amount that was on the table for the airport changed dramatically over 2 years. So I'm not sure that this number, the new number, is the correct number. And if we can get more money, let's do it. The other thing is there certainly are concerns about the nature of the privatization. We don't want to sell off every asset that is valuable to the county. I leave that in the county government's hands, but we're going to be a partner. And if it can produce revenue and the county government and the county board of legislators and the county executive want that, we will work with them to do what we have to do. Many times you have to pass a state law to authorize this kind of thing, particularly public-private partnerships. So we'll work with them if they can reach consensus. But I think it's very important that we not sell off our assets to the lowest bidder. We need resources in a smart way that will keep the resources alive and vibrant and not just shut them down to the basic level.
But there are a lot of people, in regards to the airport, there are a lot of people in the more affluent areas of Westchester in your district who are saying that this will impact their property values. It's going to influence the environment through pollution, noise, a number of factors. So how do you balance that?
Well, again, that is a county issue. And I think my view is that any arrangement, if there is one, has to respect these very legitimate concerns of residents, particularly about the hours, expanding hours of flights. That is a hornet's nest, in my opinion. Once you expand the number or the hours, it's a whole different airport. And that is a real change, not only to property values, but also to, like you say, quality of life. So that is truly a county issue. But again, if they can reach consensus, the county board and the county executive, we will work with them. But it's not ours to decide. It's not a state issue.
It's a county issue.
It's a county issue.
I think we've pretty much covered all the bases. Is there anything that I've left out? Anything more you'd like to say?
Well, I think one thing that's important is this is a great opportunity, in my opinion, to elect someone new to the Senate for this district, which runs from the Bronx line all the way to Bedford, who hopefully can be a consensus builder. We have a very divided electorate. We have a tremendous amount of hostility in our political climate. I think people who know me know that I am a bridge builder. I believe people who disagree can continue to work together to achieve what is government's role, which is a common good. And I have a long history of not only working in Albany, working in Yonkers, working in the Senate, being a fighter, a pragmatic fighter for what I think are progressive values. But I know when I can get the best I can get. I celebrate that. I try to bring others along. And then I would say we've achieved a good thing, and next year we'll go on and fight for something else. But government has a very active role to play, and the ability to make the New York State Senate have a Democratic majority and Senator Stuart Cousins to be the leader is going to change the face of the kind of governing we have. And I think I can bring the enthusiasm of the voters, as well as the ability to build consensus and a very strong sort of loyal Westchester feeling. I lived in White Plains for 18 years before I moved back to Yonkers. A real sense. I would add that in 1960, my father ran for the state senate, ironically, as a Democrat. He lost. Democrats didn't win in those days. But, you know, I grew up in the tradition where you speak out, you stand up for something, you don't always win. I haven't always won. But I think this is one where I have there's a unique moment in time, and I think I can bring something to the table. So I'm fully in.
Thank you, Shelley.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, and that's